Tonight, I'm going to tell you a story. 20 years ago, there lived a little girl. And she was a very nice and sweet little girl. Things were not always easy for her. You see, this little girl got made fun of constantly. And she was very lonely, and things were hard. She got bullied, really for not much of a reason except she was an easy target because she was nice and sweet and maybe a little overly affectionate. There were kids that would pick on her and make up lies. They would move from the lunch table if she chose to sit at it. They would make a fresh line for their class if she stood first. And times were hard for the little girl, and she was very depressed and going through a great deal. Meanwhile, two young men in high school chose to go out and take the lives of classmates and adults at their school. And it was sad, and it was wrong, and it was difficult. So this girl who lived in a different state, in a different part of the country, found herself feeling taken into consideration because of this. Like I said, she was made fun of and lonely and not treated very kindly by all the kids. Now, at school, there were teachers and proctors and other adults who were there to stand up for her and to protect her, but she was not always at school. One day, this little girl went to the park and was playing on a playground near her home and next directly to her elementary school, when two boys from her class came up and insulted her and were mean and scared her. Feeling there was no one there to protect her, it was difficult and hard. What was she to do? And suddenly a teenager came up, a young lady, and thinking perhaps this girl will protect her. The girl turned out to be the teenage sister to one of the mean boys. But instead of deriding them for their behavior, she looked them in the eye, ignoring the girl, acting as if she wasn't even there, and saying not to be mean because that girl would come to their school and shoot them. And the girl grew up, and every year the girl heard remembrances of the event that the two teenage boys had done in a different state, in a different place than she lived. And sadly, not just remembrances of that event, but shooting and attack after attack on other children and teenagers in their schools and places that were supposed to be safe. And she would hear something, and it would click in her brain quite well as she aged into adulthood, that every time an event like this occurred, many of the adults sounded like the teenage girl at the park. There was a blame and an attack almost that I don't think the girl believed they intended. They would speak about mental health issues and depression and pain that some of these people had, and would say that they needed to be watched ahead of time. They should have been on some watch list. They should have been followed. The girl looked at the language and she felt the same pain that she felt as a child. That the actions of those who had wronged her and other children and teenagers and adults that dealt with depression and sadness because of being alone and picked on and forgotten, that those actions against them were justified because they weren't good enough, they were wrong, and perhaps a future killer. They should be the ones watched, they should be the ones punished. And the girl thought on that for many years. So, as a 30-year-old adult, remembering what it was like to be a 10-year-old, in direct response to the events of Columbine and every horrible event that has happened since at a school, that sometimes makes me fear sending my own daughter into one. Something rubs me very wrong about the way we talk about stuff. When we talk about the fact that people have mental health issues or feel forgotten or left out or anything like that in response to these killings, the language that's often used is very painful to the ones that are going through issues. Like I said, as a little girl, sometimes the way that was spoken and the way that things were said felt that I wasn't good enough because I was going through pain. A couple years later, after that event at the park, I was diagnosed with depression as a medical condition, along with stuff that I was going through, just with people being awful to me growing up. I think we need to be very careful in the way that we discuss these issues. I 100% think that anyone that goes through with killing people and going through that stuff is not all mentally there. But to speak as if every person with depression or anxiety or anything like that is a monster, which is sometimes the way commentators on the news, on the radio, and just people in passing have spoken about it over the last 20 years. I've heard it over and over again, and I don't like it. I don't like feeling that's kind of my fault for being like this, and it's deserved to feel lonely and depressed and sad. And maybe you should just act upon those feelings of self-harm, which I definitely had as a kid. Even before that incident, as a little girl in 4th grade, I can remember thoughts and feelings, and those thoughts and feelings were a part of my growing up. I think God never acted upon them, and I know it's because I have Jesus in my life, and just thinking how He would respond to that and going through really detailed thought processes, but it doesn't mean that my brain wasn't there, and it doesn't mean that when people made comments about people who were depressed or lonely or picked on like they do, that I didn't feel worse about myself. So instead of saying that mental health is the issue and that these people did it because X, Y, and Z, and you need to keep your eye on them, someone should have been watching them, someone should have been looking out and acting like that, because it sounds like you want some kind of nanny state, or that's not the right word, some kind of totalitarian big brother thing towards people that are dealing with depression or people that are made fun of or lonely, and that doesn't help the situation. That can make their lives worse and make them want to act on bad feelings they're having or moments in their lives that are difficult. We don't want that at all. So if you have these thoughts related to school shootings or a number of other things where, mental health and loneliness and things like that could be an issue, my suggestion and how you would want to word these things is a lot simpler. You can say things like, the individual that did this don't even need to use names because that glorifies the situation. The individual that did this particular action could have used some extra help. How do we feel about helping fund counselors in school? I can tell you having a counselor in my elementary school was invaluable to me. It was something that I visited regularly, and it helped me as a kid go through some really difficult and upsetting emotions, including stuff like what that girl said at the park and other things surrounding it. Because X person could have used this, can we don't demonize, don't deride, don't vilify people with depression or who are picked on or who are lonely, because these are not things that they can control. They're necessarily in their wheelhouse. If people are being jerks to you, it's not your fault. And a lot of the language surrounding school shootings and things like that comes off as someone who was in that situation like it's kind of their fault, the way it's said. I don't think almost ever that's the intention, to deride people who are going through difficult times. I think, unfortunately, it often comes off spoken like that. Just like that girl said when I was in elementary school. I think a lot of adults, their brains kind of go to that. Don't make fun of that kid because they could come out with a gun. And that's not the way to help. That's not the way to deal with mental health. That's not the way to deal with these issues. I know there's a lot of debate and argument about guns and things like that, but I think at bare minimum we can all agree that if we treat people with respect and love and help people through things and not vilify people who've done nothing wrong, it's going to make the world a better place. Right, this is long and probably has even less people looking at it than normal, but this was my thoughts today on the anniversary of Columbine. So I love you guys. God bless. I'll see you tomorrow for Easter. Bye.